Up and 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Waxman Strategies Tech Policy Webinar. I'm Kirsten Maynard. I'm a Senior Vice President here at Waxman Strategies, and we are a mission-driven consulting firm. We're working on some of the issues and subjects that are the next generation of global progress, including healthcare, environment, and technology. We're here today to talk about technology, and as we have just come out of the midterm elections, we really want to look at what are the key things that the next Congress will be looking at in regards to technology policy. How can we foster innovation and ensure that everyone that's touched by technology has, consumers, workers, entrepreneurs, can benefit from, what is next in the 21st century economy. I'm thrilled today because we have Henry Waxman, who is going to be talking with us and sharing some insights from his 40 years in Congress. He needs no introduction, but I'll just note that he is one of the most effective legislators of our time. He was chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. So I wanted to, just bring him into the conversation and say thank you so much, Henry, for sharing some insights about the midterm elections and technology policy today. It's about a week out since the election day, and we still don't know exactly all the results. I think the votes are still being counted. So I wanted to get your take on what just happened in the last week.
Well, the votes are still being counted and recounted. So we don't know the winners of a number of races in the Senate, the governorships, and in the House of Representatives. But what we do know is the Democrats had a pretty good night. Democrats won back control of the House of Representatives. Many were disappointed that we didn't win seats in the South that we probably couldn't have won anyway. But we almost won in a place like Texas, which is pretty remarkable for Democrats in the many, many decades. But control of the House of Representatives will be an opportunity. I've known in my career that there's a better chance to get bills through when you work on a bipartisan basis, and when the Republican Senate and a Democratic House have to work out differences, that will lead to compromises. And that is what I think we need, rather than one-party control where nothing particularly happens, and they cede the territory to the President of the United States, which at this moment is pretty dangerous.
Well, that's true, and it looks like with Democrats' control of the House, Nancy Pelosi has an opportunity to be Speaker again. What do you think? She's already such a historic figure. Will she take back the gavel?
Well, I think she will take back the gavel, and she, by the way, people can have differences with her on some issues here or there, but she has been a tremendously effective speaker. And she was the strongest speaker that I've served with, and I came into Congress when Carl Albert was Speaker. So I've been there through a number of different leaders. She wants to get things done, and she knows how to get the consensus in her own caucus and on a bipartisan basis to get things accomplished. She's being challenged by some Democratic members who ran with the promise they wouldn't vote for her. Well, when you get to the House floor, she will be the choice of the Democratic caucus, and she will run against the choice of the Republican caucus. I can't imagine the Democrats are going to vote for the Republican. So I think she will win, and if you look at her record, it's really quite good. Not only are we back in power, but more women in the Congress, diversity, and I think there's a great deal of promise that she could offer to Democrats to come back and do things. And in the tech area, I think it's going to be high on the agenda.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, she's definitely been vocal about technology issues. She represents a district it's critical, and she's also being willing to work with President Trump on certain things. There was the sort of Chuck and Nancy days of the Trump administration, so there may be chances for her to champion some tech policy in Congress, as well as infrastructure. So In your opinion, what are some of the issues that might come through? I mean, we're looking at things like data privacy in the infrastructure, arena. There's 5G. These are critical issues when it comes to technology and making sure that we're fostering, innovation ongoing. Do you think, anything substantive will get done in Congress around those two issues?
Well, I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in the House to deal with the privacy issue. And there's a sense around the country that people have been offended by the invasion of their privacy. They want to be protected. We have Europe having acted one way. State of California similarly adopted legislation. But we've got to figure out what to do at the national level. We don't want 50 states adopting different laws. And it has to be balanced out. People want to protect their privacy, but we all want innovation, which is also important for the public interest. I think that there'll be many hearings on this. And by the way, I think a lot of technology people ought to think about how to intervene and educate members of Congress. This is an obtuse subject for many people, and there's a role to play in not just testifying. Many of the trade associations will be there to testify, but in educating the members of Congress that represent different points of view and different constituencies. One of my former staffers, Travis Moore, organized a group called Congress, where he's brought tech people to be interns in different congressional offices because there's a lack of knowledge about just how technology works. Well, if there's going to be legislation in privacy, in data privacy as well as individual privacy, if there's going to be new efforts to advance use of data and health and environment, if there's going to be an infrastructure bill, which is a real possibility on a bipartisan basis. President Trump has wanted this bill, and the Democrats would want it. There are big differences, but there's a chance to work it out. We need broadband to be everywhere and available to all citizens in the United States, all people in the United States. There's a dearth of some of the access to that broadband in some of the rural areas. So the infrastructure can be a real important area of bipartisan support. How much will become law is always a question. In the Senate, to get a bill passed, they still need 60 votes. Unfortunately, they only need a majority to confirm people on the United States Supreme Court for a lifetime job. But for legislation, 60 votes is key. And so that means that things can be stopped. But there'll be, I think, an interest as we face the 2020 elections, although we've just finished one election, people have to think about the next one, to get things done, to run on a record. And that will be of importance to Democrats and Republicans, because nothing can become law without both parties.
I think that's just such an excellent point, because and the tech industry has a chance to actually be a part of the process. This is, I think navigating DC can be tough if you don't know how things work here and you don't know the folks that are making the policy. So getting to know the people that are going to be, championing your issues into policy and legislation. This is a critical time for technology to come to DC and be a part of what is shaping the future. Working with their representatives to bring their voice into the conversation in Congress, and looking to leaders like Nancy Pelosi to set the stage for some of this. She's already done some of that with an Internet Bill of Rights that she's proposed, that Ro Khanna is going to be hopefully moving forward in Congress over the next year or so. And
a new chairman of committees and subcommittees in both the House and the Senate, perhaps. We don't know about the Senate yet, but it looks like we may have a new chair, Republican chair of the Commerce Committee, as well as, we don't know, maybe a new ranking Democrat, depending on how the election recount goes in Florida. But there'll be new chairs, certainly in the House. in both the Judiciary Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee. Some of the people who are going to be important players will be familiar to those who are involved in tech issues, but they're going to change roles in the House, and those who are in the minority will now be in the majority, but they've got to work together, Democrats and Republicans, to get something done.
Very important. Great. And so, yeah, any other advice for tech companies? I know we're looking at a couple of critical sectors: healthcare, health tech, energy, and green tech, being two areas where technology is coming into industries that are well established and have lots of processes and programs in place. How can technology advocate? Is it about getting to know your committee chair and and kind of putting your voice forward? What's the best way for technology companies to really share their opinions and their needs and ideas?
I think that they have to focus in on the subcommittees and committees of jurisdiction on these issues. They ought to let their own member representing them know some of their views, but they're not going to be all that involved if they're not on the appropriate committee. The public hearings are one place to talk about their point of view and to show nuances on issues that people would just say, oh yeah, of course we want privacy, but we also want technology to be developed. And so there are those nuances and balancing that has to be achieved. I think it's important to be heard and to figure it out and to get involved, especially at a time when maybe the House and the Senate are going to be starting again to renew their education on tech policy as they try to do important things, far-reaching things in health and environment and telecommunications generally.
Right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and giving your insights about the 116th Congress coming up.
Yeah, thank you for arranging this session so that people can talk about and learn about what to expect in the new administration in Congress.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Henry Waxman. Fabulous. And I want to introduce Morgan Reed. Morgan Reed is the president of the App Association, and the App Association represents 5,000 app makers, developers, engineers, and technologists who are really shaping the innovation that's happening in technology right now. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to be here. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So we just heard from Congressman Waxman about how we can work together and about educating Congress people about technology issues and keeping them up to date on what the technology industry needs. He touched on a few things: data privacy, touched on infrastructure and 5G. Let's start with data privacy. Is that something you think is going to be front and center at this point, with GDPR happening in the European Union, with California, developing their own standards? How do you see that coming to fore? And
Well, it's a great question, and I think the reality is what we saw in the hearings we had last year is we're jokingly saying that 2019 is going to be the year of privacy. One could say it's been kind of several years in a row, but 2019 feels as though there is a significant momentum for something to happen. I think it's very interesting as we talk about this to understand for your listeners that privacy is not strictly a tech issue in the classic sense of, nerds at keyboards. It's actually about data, and there's not a single industry in the United States that doesn't care about, manage, and utilize their data to drive their business forward. So all of this legislation around privacy has at its core a discussion about how do we handle your users' data. So I think the major fulcrum points, as you described, are the European GDPR regulations that are going into effect, and what we heard from Congressman Waxman, which is definitely very prominent in everyone's minds, is California. California's bill goes into effect on January 1st of 2020. And so 2019 is going to raise the question of, is the California bill the law of the land, Is a new version going to arise from the committees of jurisdiction? Or is there going to be a new path forged somewhere in between California, Europe, and the state of play for innovation?
I mean, I think tech companies, just like any companies, want certainty. They want to know, what am I working with here? And so, we, would hope to avoid is a situation where we have 50 different regulations in 50 different states about how to handle data. And these are, critical moments for Congress to work together on a bipartisan level.
Patchwork legislation is always a nightmare from a business perspective. One of the things that's very interesting from the tech sector is, again, basically there isn't a company in the United States that isn't a tech company if they look under the covers. And the reason that that's important is there's a perception that these issues are strictly a coastal question. A few tech companies on either the left or the right coast, when in the reality is that we see data privacy issues appearing in all 435 congressional districts. So when Congressman Waxman said, let your local representative make sure they're aware of it and represent you, I think he raises a really important point, and it's something that we all have to work hard in doing. Make sure that your congressperson is an advocate for your perspective on this issue if you're an employer in that district.
Yeah. And then how does that play out with infrastructure? I mean, I think this is an issue that
Yes.
both parties have talked about. Trump obviously is a fan. What are the key sectors in the infrastructure realm that you think are going to be most effective for technology companies? I think 5G, obviously, as Congressman Waxman mentioned, making sure people have access to broadband. What are the sectors, and how will that play out in things like, for example, healthcare?
Right. So if you think of it this way, broadband or high-speed internet is not merely a good way to watch Netflix streaming videos. Not that we don't do that, but the reality is that moving an image or information across a wire is a critical part of our business. When your sales team is sitting there at a coffee shop and wanting to show the projected sales, or maybe to say, do you want this product in green or red? The ability to make that change instantaneously at that coffee shop to satisfy that customer to say, I'll get them to you in red, have it go right back to the facility, have the change happen at the factory floor, and the shipping department be notified immediately to get that out the door. That's a change in your business. And so infrastructure, when we talk about 5G, is the power to make that vision a reality. But as you raised, there are 23 million Americans right now that don't have access. It's not a matter of they can't pay for it, it doesn't exist where they are. So pushing forward on 5G, unleashing unlicensed spectrum in the form of TV white spaces, other ways to get that 23 million Americans served is going to be critical. And it's critical beyond tech, it's critical for all business.
Yeah, and to that point, I think having broadband available and making sure people can get high-speed internet wherever they are will increase the ability for smaller tech companies around the country to be a bigger player in their own communities. So we're doing a lot of work with smart cities and with transportation and with data around cities and making sure that citizens are have the tools that they need to live their lives and improve their lives. So these are areas where we're seeing smaller tech companies that are coming up and being able to bring their ideas to their local communities and integrate, making cities smarter, healthier, and more effective.
I think that's a great point. If there was one thing I would add to your previous conversation with Congressman Waxman, the number one issue facing the tech industry is, as much as I love infrastructure, it's not really infrastructure. It's not all the other issues we talked about. It's actually manpower. It's smart people, both women and men, who can solve problems. Right now, there are 500,000 open jobs, not potential jobs, not discussed jobs, but open headcounts that are not filled in these companies. And you hit on a really important point. Broadband infrastructure changes that, because now I can find employees in places that aren't right next door, but have the same talent, capability, insights from a smart city or an area that's 200 miles away from my headquarters or 500 miles away. And so when you talk about that infrastructure, think about the manpower impact that it has, the person power impact that it has in unleashing talent through smart cities around the country.
it's a labor force that is growing, and it's an important one for the future. So one thing I definitely want to touch on in regards to, how 5G plays into infrastructure is healthcare, and specifically around, digital health and privacy. A lot of these issues are converging around healthcare, and this is,
Correct.
an industry that really is ripe for innovation and getting to a place where we can offer care to more people for less cost, and really manage some of those costs in government. So, so tell us about some of the things that your members and what you're working on around that.
So I think the reality is that we all see a picture ahead of us where digital medicine is not a nice to have, but a must have. The American Medical Association has estimated that they will be short 90,000 physicians across the United States by 2025, and that there will be 70 million Americans over the age of 65 by 2030. So we have a problem of not enough care providers, and too many people at a stage in their life where they need care for chronic conditions. You have states that are already in crisis, like Wyoming, that has 157 physicians for every 100,000 people. When you hit those numbers, you have to look for remote patient monitoring, telemedicine, the ability to bring a specialist in. I'll give you an easy example. Retinopathy, to find out if somebody's going blind from diabetes or another condition, a lot of primary care physicians lack the expertise or the tools to really do it. So how do you provide a digital tool that allows a physician to take a picture of the back of your eye, send it to a specialist who then reviews that image, makes a diagnosis and says, you look good, or it's time to go to another town and see a specialist? Those kinds of things are critical for moving the path forward, finding ways for that care to be reimbursed. And then, as you noted in infrastructure, that only happens if you have the kind of high speed, low latency, high bandwidth infrastructure that you need to get it done. Because that physician, that primary care physician, if he holds up that magic device and takes a picture, but the picture doesn't send, then it's all lost.
Yep. Yeah. And that brings into play, everything from Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA, as you mentioned, to wearables. It's everything from electronic health records to, making sure that patients can actually share their information. Data privacy laws aren't so strict that they can't share their own information with their own physician.
Well, that's a really good point. Anyone who works in the medical space has always heard the term HIPAA, and everybody on this has probably been to the doctor where they signed that form that they didn't read that said something about HIPAA. What's key is the P in HIPAA is actually for portability, not privacy. And we lose track of the fact that at the core of what we were trying to achieve with HIPAA and with all of these regulations is really empowering the patient to be in control of their health record. And that frees them up to give it to a specialist, to provide it to their primary care physician, to seek a second opinion. And so we have to be careful with data privacy laws, as you discussed. We need to make sure that in a move to ensure good customer and good consumer attitudes towards data sharing, that we don't lose track of the really valuable health benefits that can come from data sharing. Mm-hmm. And so I think remembering that HIPAA, it's about portability as well as privacy.
Yeah. Which kind of leads me to my next point, which I think is about big tech. So, with the new Congress, there's going to be more oversight across the board, probably. But with regards to kind of looking at big tech and how things have been handled around elections and around, sort of information, factual information, it seems like there's some energy around, kind of calling big tech to task. Is that going to happen in the new Congress? And is there any interest really in reining in the tech companies, and is it needed?
Well, I think at the core of that question is that a lot of it comes down to how this made people feel. And so and I think you almost have to divide when you say big tech. It's really awkward because we're really talking about social media companies as opposed to infrastructure companies. But yet they're all part of big tech. Some people make devices, some people make software, others are building ad-supported but social media networks that are really about providing people opportunities to exchange views and engage. I think Congress is going to continue to pay close attention to the social media aspects of it because, let's face it, members of Congress are responsive to their constituents, and the constituents are right there on those social media platforms, sometimes yelling at each other across the void, But I also see a lot of members who are trying to use social media platforms to communicate directly to their constituents.
Yeah.
Around the country, when votes were being counted, you saw members of both parties using those social media platforms to say, here's where we're at, here's where the recount is at, I'm here, there's a video of me watching results. So I expect Congress to continue to have a bit of a sharp eye. I think the part that makes it both concerning from a tech perspective, but also something worth watching is I don't see this as being one party or the other. Both parties have access to grind in their perception, or rather their constituents' perception about what's happening on social media. So I think that Congress will, as Congressman Waxman alluded to, continue to have numerous and multiple hearings on this, and there will be a lot of viewpoints shared. I think if you think about last year's hearings and the broad range and diversity of viewpoints that showed up, I think we can expect more of the same. So social media tech companies will continue to spend some time in the spotlight.
Well, and that's, because there are positives and negatives, that
right.
come with it. And the positive is technology is helping people be more engaged in the process of their representation. They can hear more directly from their representatives, and that's such an important part of the process. So it really is enabling, elected representatives, elected officials to share their views more directly with their constituents, get their engagement with those messages, and then be a part of whether it's events or other types of voicing their own opinions, having voters be a part of that. So it's important to make sure that stays intact as well.
I think you used a key word there, hear. And I'm hopeful that on all sides of the discussion, that ears are open and views are not already locked in on a lot of these issues. And I know that for the upcoming Congress, a lot of people in town, as you both talked about, are going to be looking for ways to educate and to inform and really try to drive that understanding that this is about hearing, not merely speaking. And there's a lot of work to be done in DC by all industries across the board in ensuring that kind of knowledge base and understanding of, frankly, the complexities of some of these issues.
Yeah, which is why we're hoping that technology companies can be more active in DC and be more a part of the process. Share their issues with the policymakers, so we can create a competitive ecosystem for technology that sets the right boundaries for consumer protections, but also fosters innovation as technology moves into so many parts of our lives. So. I want to thank you for being here to talk about these issues and what we expect in the next Congress, and 2019 is just around the corner. So thanks for a great conversation. If you'd like to contact us, please reach out to info@waxmanstrategies.com or follow us on Twitter @Team Waxman, and make sure to go to ACT Online, which is the APP Association's website. They
actonline.org, and you can find us on all the things, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, we're there.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.